Here's the entire point of the concept of original sin. It answers the question, what is wrong with us? But it answers that question well before you even get a say in the matter. Because you see, according to the doctrine of original sin, you are born broken. And that should really make us pause before we just accept it. Because that's not just a statement about behavior. It's not saying that, you do some bad things every once in a while. It's actually a statement about your nature. It's saying that before you even begin life, you are already off target. You don't start neutral. You don't start whole. You don't start with possibility. You start damaged. And that's a massive claim to make about every human being who has ever taken a breath on this earth. So before we either defend or reject this concept, this doctrine of original sin, we should probably try to understand why ancient people came up with it in the first place. When people talk about original sin, they usually jump straight into guilt. You're born sinful, or you inherited Adam's fall, or you are spiritually defective from the start. But historically, the doctrine wasn't just about shaming individuals. It was really about something bigger than that. It was really about trying to figure out what is wrong with our entire world. When we look around us, what do we see? We see that we've got people all around us, we've got resources all around us. You would think that we could get our act together and turn this place into an absolute paradise. But we don't. Why? Why don't we? Why do we choose to do terrible things instead? Why do empires exploit their territories? Why do people betray one another? Why does violence keep repeating itself again and again and again? You see, these are the kinds of things that original sin answers by saying is all because we are sinful to the core. But the thing is that original sin doesn't stop there, because it's not just about human behavior. It's also about creation itself. Why do tornadoes destroy villages? Why do fatal illnesses strike without warning? Why do earthquakes swallow entire cities? Original sin was an explanation for it all. You see, according to the concept, humanity had ruptured the fabric of creation, and now everything is borked. Thanks to humanity, the natural world in which we live is no longer neutral. It's fallen, or worse, it's actually punishing. Now, think about what having access to that framework did for the ancient mind. Suddenly, all of their suffering made moral sense. They could understand why the world was chaotic and dangerous. It was because we, humanity, had sinned. So what we see is this. The concept of original sin was an ancient diagnostic tool that they used to understand the human condition. And for its time, it was an incredibly powerful one. The power of the concept of original sin resulted from its relevance to ancient culture. Think about the world that produced that theology. No meteorology, no germ theory, no evolutionary biology, no neuroscience. So if a plague wiped out your entire village, you didn't have epidemiology. If lightning struck your home, you did not have atmospheric science. All you had to explain such things was story. And the story that made the most sense was this: something has gone wrong in the relationship between you and God. And once you had that diagnosis, then you could come up with a cure. And in this particular case, the cure was to reconcile with God. That diagnosis not only gave a sense of coherence to the chaos, perhaps more importantly, it empowered them to feel like they were able to do something about it. This was not a stupid way of looking at the world. This was just the best explanatory framework that they had available to them at the time. And later thinkers like Augustine and others are going to update and systematize this understanding of original sin even farther. And the idea is going to become more and more refined. But through it all, through all of those updates, The whole point of original sin was going to remain the same, to answer the question, what is wrong with our world? And by the way, if this is the kind of topic that really interests you, I want you to know that you are in the right place, because I make videos for progressive Christians, questioners, and the church alumni. You know, those people who live on the edge of faith, whether they've left the church behind or whether they're still sitting in the pews. So if this is you, please like and subscribe so that we can stay connected. But here's where things get complicated. Because when you universalize that explanation, it doesn't just diagnose the world or the human condition in general. Eventually it comes down to a diagnosis of you as a person. You personally are born guilty. You personally are born corrupt. You personally are fundamentally disordered. And over time, if individuals keep hearing that message again and again and again, it's going to seep into their psyches. Children are going to internalize it. Shame is going to attach to the body. Desire is going to start becoming suspicious, and suffering becomes morally charged. And sometimes even natural disasters get interpreted as divine punishment. So if your house was destroyed, maybe that's God punishing you for something that you did. Or if you're sick, maybe that is the spiritual consequence of your secret thoughts. You can probably see how this starts to become very dangerous spiritually. Because now the problem isn't that the world is broken. The problem is that you personally are broken right to the very core. Let me point out what is probably quite obvious. The world that produced original sin as a concept is not our world anymore. Today, when a tornado destroys a village, we don't reach for Genesis to understand why. We reach for meteorology. We understand pressure systems. We understand warm and cold fronts colliding. We understand atmospheric instability. Tornadoes are not moral events. They are weather systems. And when cancer strikes, we don't assume some sort of divine curse. Instead, we study cellular mutation. When earthquakes devastate cities, we don't talk about divine anger. Instead, we talk about tectonic plates. And when human beings act destructively, we don't understand it through the lens of depravity. We talk about trauma. We talk about attachment wounds, psychological development, social conditioning, systemic pressures. Today, you see, we have a whole plethora of new diagnostic tools to help us understand what in the world is wrong with the world around us. And quite frankly, they are far more powerful and far more effective than anything that we have ever had before. Here's the real question. If your diagnosis changes, what happens to the doctrine that gave you the original diagnosis in the first place? In other words, if natural disasters are not punishment, and if cancer is not a curse, if human dysfunction can be explained through development and trauma instead, then do we still really need the concept of inherited cosmic guilt? I mean, do we? Now, obviously, we still need language for harm. We still need language for things like alienation. We still need language for all of the ways that we tend to wound ourselves and others. But do we really need the idea that you were born spiritually defective because of some primeval human act? I mean, think about it. That framework existed for a reason. It was diagnosing a problem. And the diagnosis was inherited metaphysical corruption. Therefore, the solution is supernatural repair. But today, we understand the problem very differently, and so we solve it very differently. So in other words, if the problem is the result of trauma, fear, scarcity, and systems, then the path we take forward is going to look very, very different. Now, keeping that in mind, here is the significance of this line of questioning. When we incorrectly diagnose a problem, we risk applying the wrong cure. Or worse, we end up applying a cure that ends up doing more harm than good. So maybe it's time to let go of that old framework, that framework of original sin. I mean, not because it was malicious, but because it was contextual, and we just don't live in that context anymore. Sure, ancient people used the best explanatory language that they had available to them, but we have much, much better tools now. And maybe the most faithful thing we can do is to not cling to outdated diagnoses, but instead allow our understanding to mature. I mean, the question is still going to exist. We're still going to wonder, what in the world is wrong with our world? And we're going to still wrestle with people causing real harm to each other, and entire families being destroyed by natural disasters, and illnesses taking people's lives before they even reach middle age. It's not like the world has stopped being painful, because it clearly still is. But that doesn't mean that we should be telling children that they are born spiritually defective. It doesn't mean we should see personal tragedy as divine punishment. Those are outdated diagnoses, and they do real harm to real people. If original sin was an attempt to answer the question, what is wrong with our world? Then maybe today's question for us is, what is actually wrong with our world to the best of our understanding? And what kind of language helps us to address the problem rather than contributing to it? What kind of language will help us to diagnose the problem appropriately so that we can heal rather than force people to live in shame? In these next videos that I create, I want to explore whether the concept of sin itself can be redefined, not as inherited existential guilt, but rather as something far more relational and more practical for understanding the human condition. Because if the problem isn't that you were born broken, then the work ahead of us might look very, very different. And I don't know about you, but to me, that's kind of good news. So if you want to see those videos as soon as they go live, make sure to like and subscribe so we can stay connected. I'm Bo McGuffey of the Evolving Christian Faith Network. Until next time, peace.